Hello and welcome to Alex's Model Kits. This is a video to talk about the model I'm making at the moment, which is the Airfix 1/48 scale Blenheim Mark 1F, and also there's a few other things I wanted to talk about as well, some of which are, I think, very difficult to ignore, and so it's probably best to start talking about those to start with. And the thing that is hard to ignore is today is the 15th of May 2020, and the world is going through a bit of a virus pandemic at the moment, which has affected everyone to varying degrees, and various countries have responded in different ways. I'm not going to go into the politics of who's right and who's wrong and who's done things well and who hasn't, but various countries have done different things, and most countries, including here in Great Britain, have gone down the path of social isolation or self-isolation, and basically asking people to stay home. And there's been a lot of jokes, I think, in the modelling community about the fact that we don't really notice the difference. What is this social isolation? This is just normal life as far as we're concerned. And all joking aside, I've got to say that for me personally, I'm really not noticing much difference in my life. I'm quite comfortable being at home and doing my own things. My hobbies are model making, sort of reading, a bit of research, a bit of history. So for me, you know, this is just normal life. And the same goes for my wife. We're very fortunate. We have very similar sort of outlooks on things and views on things. And for her, she's downstairs at the moment reading a book. This is just for her a normal day, and you know, we both are quite content with this. But it's fair to say, and I'm sure that other model makers feel the same kind of way, it's not really a massive issue for them. But I think it's fair to say that we probably all know people who are less self-contained, who are more socially active, and for them, they are probably finding this social isolation quite difficult. And so I just wanted to sort of maybe take a moment to say, well, if you know people like that, if you have friends and family who are a bit more socially outgoing, they probably are struggling a little bit more with this than we are. Give them a call, give them a phone call. Don't email them or text them. Give them a call so they can hear a voice and talk to someone and feel connected with the outside world, and just reassure them this will all pass. It will pass. I'm not sure how long it's going to take before it does pass, but you know, there will be a solution to this, and we will start to return to normal life. And I know a lot of people are talking about the new norm. If I'm honest, I don't think that the new norm will be different from the old norm. I think it will take a while to get to where we were before, but I don't think we are going to find ourselves in the long term living a life that's different from how we were this time last year. We just need to wait for people to come up with vaccines and make them available, and get things sorted out. And that could take a while, but it will come. So give them a call and give them a bit of reassurance, and I'm sure they will appreciate the thought and the connection surrounding that. The other thing I wanted to talk about very quickly was actually a bit of a thank you, really. A thank you to Ian Poulton, who runs the YouTube channel called UK Scale Modeller. Ian and I chat from time to time. He knows that I do quite enjoy reading. I'm quite interested in history. One of the reasons I make models is because I find the history surrounding them quite interesting. And Ian very generously sent me a little while ago this book. So I just wanted to, I've already spoken to him. I was talking about phoning people up and not texting people, but actually I sent a quick text message saying thank you very much. And I just wanted to take the opportunity now to thank him again. Very generous of you, thank you very much. This is a very good book for those who haven't read it. It talks about a Blenheim squadron fighting during the fall of France, and beyond. It's a sort of basically sort of 1940, and as the name might suggest, a squadron that died twice. It does not come out well for the crew or for the squadron members of that particular squadron. They go on several raids. They suffer some fairly serious losses, and on two particular raids, as the title might suggest, they are pretty much wiped out. I think on both occasions one aircraft lives to return for different reasons. It is a fairly harrowing book if you think about the age of the young men involved and the number of times they're asked to go out and face really extraordinary odds. It is quite a sobering and harrowing book to read, but I think it's a very good depiction of what was going on. The author certainly, I think, is quite passionate about the subject. He really does go to some lengths to try and get across the sense of impending fate, I think, that awaits each of these people. He talks about, you know, certain squadrons or certain crewmen of aircraft that survive a near-death experience, maybe on a Monday, and are in the bar celebrating their good fortune Monday evening, and yet by Wednesday or Thursday they're dead because their luck runs out. So it's an eye-opening book, and I recommend that if you're interested in reading about Bomber Command and their experiences during the early part of the war, it's a good book to have a read of. The other book I'd recommend, whilst we're talking about books, is this book here, 6 Weeks of a Blenheim Summer, and this is actually a memoir from a Blenheim pilot who fought during the fall of France. He was very fortunate to survive the war. He survives it in unfortunate circumstances, which is that in that 6-week period he's shot down 3 times. I think he survives partially because his aircraft and 2 others are detached from normal bomber duties and asked to start to do reconnaissance because the British forces, the BEF, are not entirely convinced about the French reconnaissance or intelligence information, and so they set up these 3 Blenheims to basically find the front line and report what they are seeing in terms of British forces and French forces and also German forces and where they might be. And he talks about that. As I say, he gets shot down, I think, 3 times in that 6-week period. And I think the reason why he survives the war is because he doesn't talk about it during the book, but in the epilogue he mentions, or I think his son mentions, the fact that he was shot down a 4th time. Just as the memoirs end, he's shot down a 4th time and quite badly wounded. I think he's quite badly burnt, and so his war is over. He's captured, and I think he's treated initially by German medical staff, and then either repatriated back to Britain for treatment there, or just remains as a prisoner of war. But either way, his war is over, and that is really what saves his life. He, again, in the epilogue, it's mentioned that of all the people that he trained with and met before the war, only he and 2 others survived the war, and they were also injured. So it is also quite an eye-opening book. It's quite an interesting book. It's interesting. It's told from a different angle because this is a memoir. He kind of tells it as though he was there at the time, whereas this is really a historical record of what was going on, and the guy talks about it with the benefit of hindsight as well. So 2 good books about the subject that I'm making a model of, which probably I should talk about now, and that is the Blenheim Mark 1F. So I really like this kit. I think it is a really good kit. It's a really interesting kit. This is the fuselage put together so far. All the cockpit detail has been placed inside the fuselage, and I'm hoping later today to put the canopy over the top. There's a small fit issue on the underside, which I'm not sure you'll be able to see, but this area here this is the bomb bay doors, and there's a slight fit issue. It doesn't quite fit flush with the rest of the fuselage, and I'm not sure where the problem lies. I'm not sure if there's something that's just caused the fuselage to bulge, because there's quite a lot of where the wing spars are. There's quite a lot of stuff surrounding the wing spars and the bomb bay, and I just wonder if something has caused the fuselage to bulge out slightly. Or alternatively, it could be just a poorly moulded piece, but I don't think that's the case. I think with these new toolings, they generally tend to be quite well done. So I think there may be an issue inside, internally. And I had thought about taking those bomb bay doors off and trying to find the problem and resolve it. And I'm not going to do that for two reasons, really. The first is that this is part of a group build, and I've got maybe a couple of weeks left to get this completed. And you know, anyone who's watched my videos on a regular basis will know that I generally tend to miss deadlines for group builds and things. It's all about the journey rather than destination for me, really, with model making. But it is nice sometimes to try and get something finished within the timescale. And I think if I take the bomb bay doors off and start working on it, it's just going to slow me down, and I definitely won't meet that deadline. So for that reason, I'm going to leave it. But the other reason I'm going to leave it is because people maybe don't realise, but these bomb bay doors, not that they're going to be used with the fighter version because there's a gun pack that sits there, but with the bomber version, the bomb bay doors are held on or held closed with what is essentially bungee cord. And what happens is that the bomb inside is released, it drops down and hits the bomb bay doors, and then the elastic cord just allows the bomb bay doors to flip open and the bomb falls out, and then the elastic then brings the doors closed again, which is a really strange Heath Robinson arrangement, but that's how the Blenheim was in terms of bomb bay doors. And so part of me thinks, why go to the effort of getting it really perfectly fitting when it feels like such a cack-handed way of doing things? I don't think they really spent much time really making sure that they were fitting perfectly anyway. If that's the best they can do in terms of open and closing mechanisms, then why would they spend time making sure it's all perfectly flush? And so I'm going to leave it as it is for the moment. I'm going to just stick with that and carry on with the rest of the kit. I've got the wings, the upper side of the wings painted and the underside of the wings painted, and so the next thing to do is to insert the undercarriage, which I'll show you in a moment, into the hole here. It kind of drives through and pushes down and then gets embedded in there, and then the wing goes on top. Some people kind of wonder why I do my wings like this. I've got two halves painted up pretty much entirely with a sort of camouflage scheme and everything else, and yet the fuselage, as you saw, is largely unpainted. The underside's painted, but the top part is not really painted at all. And it might seem like a strange way of doing things. Most model makers, when they make aircraft, they paint all the internals. They leave the external completely, and then they paint the external of the aircraft in one, in one kind of go. The reason I do this is because I've always struggled to get my masking tape to sit as a straight line on the leading edge, and what I found is that the masking tape would always just kind of peel up slightly and leave a gap and a wavy line. And so I tried several times to get that to work. I couldn't make it work. And so eventually I thought, well, there's no point. I don't need to actually mask the wings to get that straight line between the underside and the top side. If I just leave them and paint them separately, then as soon as you join them together, you've got your straight line done for you just by the way I'm painting it. And so that's the reason why I generally paint the wings separately and then join them together. Generally speaking, with most kits, what I do also tend to do is I tend to paint the fuselage as well, and get as much painted as possible before I start to really do the final assembly. But I found with a kit I did a little while ago, which was the Whitley, I found that I was starting to run into fit issues with that, and part of me thought it may have been because I was painting everything up in advance, and the width of the paint was starting to have a negative effect on the fit, and so it's really hard when I'm so used to doing it this way, and with older kits which are sort of have a greater tolerance, it's not a problem, but with the newer kits it does seem to be a problem. It's very difficult not to do what I normally do, and paint the entire kit sort of in pieces and then just kind of finish it off afterwards. But I'm doing my best, and this one is going to remain unpainted until the wings are in place. And what I'll then do is I'll just I'll mask where I've got the camouflage for the wing against the wing root. I'll mask that and then paint the fuselage, and then after that paint the camouflage on top of that. So so that's the plan to get this painted up. The kit's got several really nice sub-assemblies. It's got a couple of engines, which that's one of them there. I've weathered this, and I think, if I'm honest, I've gone over the top with the weathering. It looks a bit more beaten up than maybe it should do, but it's kind of a learning process, and I don't really want to spend time revising that. Everything's now glued together, and I think if I was going to change it, I should have changed it before I glued it. So I'm just going to stick with that. We've also got the undercarriage. We've got two of these. This is probably one of the most intricate things I've put together so far. It is quite complex. It's quite nice when you look at it in its finished view. I'm slightly concerned about trying to fit it through the wheel well. I think some of it may break off, but I'll just have to work on that and see how we go. And then the last thing is the gun turret. This is the gun turret here, and one of the things I like about model making is that sometimes it gives you an idea that you hadn't, or a sense about the aircraft that you hadn't realized before. And I find this quite interesting because all of this mechanism is there for one single machine gun. And if this were a German aircraft, then they would have a ball and socket mount. So they would have basically a bar that came out of the fuselage with a ball, and they'd have a mounting for the machine gun with a socket, and then they would just basically mount the machine gun onto that ball and socket. And that's a far lighter arrangement for the aircraft, which means that you get a better performance. You're not weighing the aircraft down with a lot of extra kit. And this turret mechanism, I've never seen much in terms of a turret mechanism. You always, from the modelling side of things, you just see the dome and nothing else. So it is really interesting to see just how much mechanism sits beneath that dome, and just how much weight there must be there for that single machine gun. Interestingly, I think the Blenheim's sister aircraft, the Beaufighter, which came out around the same kind of, or just slightly after the Blenheim, that also had a single machine gun as defensive armament, and that was on a ball and socket joint. So clearly there was a sort of maybe a tipping point where someone said, well, we don't necessarily need this, or maybe we do. The other aircraft that Bristol produced in the Second World War, which is the Bristol Beaufort, Beaufort was based largely, it's a marinized version of the Blenheim, and it was supposed to be just basically a Blenheim, but slightly marinized to take torpedoes. But by the time they'd made the changes necessary for the aircraft, it was so different. It's got its own classification and name as the Beaufort, and that also has a defensive armament, I think, of 2 machine guns, and that is in a turret, again a powered turret, but without the full 360 degree capability. It just basically fires through an arc around the back. Later Blenheims, thinking about it, they did convert from one machine gun to two as well. So, you know, it's just an interesting thing. It's just interesting to see how much weight is carried for the turret mechanism alone, and maybe the trade-off in performance to get that defensive armament sorted out. So I think that's pretty much it for this kit at the moment, in terms of progress being made so far. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I think the last thing to say, there's a couple of things actually. There is no letter this time round from Mrs. Trellis. She has taken social isolation into extremes, and she's not even writing letters apparently, so I have nothing from her this time round. But the other thing I would like to say is that quite a few museums at the moment are struggling, I think, a little bit with this social isolation. They still have costs, they still have security they have to lay on, they still have to source out electricity for heating or dehumidifying or lighting or whatever else. They still have all the running costs to keep the museum running and to keep the exhibits safe. But the prime source of their income, which is people like us turning up, at the moment they have no access to that income. And what I've noticed is that there are a few museums that have a YouTube channel, and the one in particular I'm thinking of is a tank museum based down in Bovington, and they've been producing videos for quite a long time. If you're interested in tanks or just interested in history, then I would definitely recommend go to the Tank Museum YouTube channel and subscribe to that and have a look at their videos. But what they've been doing during this social lockdown period is they've been producing quite an increase in videos just to get that output sorted out. I think partially just to help the nation, help those who are interested by providing something which is of interest to look at when you can't go outside and do anything else. They're doing as many people are doing. They're trying to produce content to keep people entertained. And one of the things that they do is they do tank chats. They talk about specific tanks, and at the moment, whilst this lockdown is in operation, their curator, a chap called David Willey, he is producing some fantastic videos from his back garden, talking about various aspects of tanks and tank warfare, and who wore what and who used what. And I mean, these are great. They're fantastic sources of information that, you know, in other circumstances people would pay probably a lot of money to get a ticket to go and see, and he's producing it on YouTube for free. So they're worth watching, and he always tends to finish off by saying the museum needs support, and he asks, or he suggests to people that the museum shop is still open. You can buy books, you can buy model kits. It's a good way of supporting the museum because they still get some income, they get a profit out of that. And he suggests for those who can, and not everyone is in a position to do so, in this lockdown period, some people have lost their jobs, sadly. Some people are not working but receiving a reduced income, so ready for when this finishes and they can start to work again. And other people like myself, I'm working full time. I still do all my hours. I'm just working from there rather than working from the office. In fact, if anything, I now have less free time than I had before because work life and home life seem to bleed into each other a little bit more. But so I'm very fortunate in that I have no reduction in income. And for those who are in a position to maybe support not just the Tank Museum, but any museum that you particularly feel strongly about, I'd recommend that you do so, because museums are, I think, quite intrinsic to our hobby. They are a good source of information for model makers who want to find out how to make their kits look, but also they are a good source for kit manufacturers such as Airfix and Revel. If they want to do a new kit or something, then they'll go to a museum and use an exhibit to start making measurements from and to create their toolings from. And so really, you know, from my point of view, I think museums support us in our hobby, and it's really good that we should be able to support them at this moment as well. So certainly I'm talking about the Tank Museum, but like I say, there are plenty of other museums out there that could do with support if possible. So please, if you can, take a moment and either make a donation or make a purchase and help them if you can to get some income coming in. And you never know, you may find if you buy a few books, for example, the Tank Museum, it might arrive in a rather splendid box through the post, which I was quite pleased about. I got a couple of books from them a few weeks ago. So I think that's genuinely it now. I think the last thing to say really is please take care. Social distancing seems to be easing up at the moment. Please don't go mad. Don't rush out there and start hugging and licking everyone you can find. We still need to be sensible about what we're doing, and please be patient, and this will pass. So thank you for watching. Please do take care, and I will see you again soon. Okay, thanks then, and bye.